The night was supposed to be like any other in the long, exhausting string of performances that defined Michael Jackson's legendary career. Yet as he sat quietly in the dressing room of a massive European stadium in the late 1990s, surrounded by walls plastered with posters of his own face, something inside him shifted. For once, the excitement of the crowd, the thunderous, earth-shaking roar of tens of thousands of fans chanting his name, didn't stir the familiar rush of adrenaline. Instead, it filled him with dread. Michael leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees, his sequined jacket draped across the back of a chair. The sound of the audience seeped through the walls like waves pounding against a fragile shore. He pressed his palms against his ears, wishing he could drown it all out. "I can't do this anymore," he whispered under his breath. Karen, his makeup artist, fussed with brushes at the vanity. She glanced at him through the mirror. "Michael, are you okay?" she asked gently, though she could already tell something was terribly wrong. He gave a faint smile, the kind he used when he wanted to reassure others even as he crumbled inside. "I'm fine," he lied. But he wasn't fine. For weeks, the pressure had been building, tabloid headlines tearing him apart, lawsuits draining his spirit, sleepless nights filled with paranoia and fear. Each concert felt less like a celebration of music and more like a trial he had to survive. He loved his fans, adored the connection they gave him, but tonight the thought of stepping out into that spotlight felt unbearable. Bill Bray, his longtime security chief, entered the room, earpiece crackling with updates. "5 minutes, Mike," he said. "Crowd's getting restless." Normally, Michael would be bouncing on his heels, humming, ready to burst into the world as the king of pop. But instead, he sat frozen, staring at the floor, his chest rising and falling with shallow breaths. Bill noticed. "You all right?" Michael shook his head slowly. "No, Bill. I can't. Not tonight. Maybe not ever again." The words hung heavy in the air. Karen froze, brush in hand. Bill's eyes widened. "What do you mean, not ever again?" Michael's voice cracked, tears brimming in his eyes. "I don't want to do this anymore. I don't want to be Michael Jackson. Not tonight. Not tomorrow. Not ever again." Outside, the chant grew louder. "Michael! Michael! Michael!" But inside the small room, silence pressed down like a suffocating blanket. Bill crouched in front of him, gripping his shoulders. "Listen to me, Mike. You don't have to be the king of pop out there. Just be you. That's all they want." But Michael shook his head. "No. They don't want me. They want the mask. The glove. The hat. The moonwalk. They don't care about me. And I can't keep pretending." His hands trembled as he pulled off his sequined glove and tossed it onto the floor. "Tonight is the night I walk away." Michael's trembling hands rested on his knees as he whispered those words. "Tonight is the night I walk away." They were not born in that instant. They were echoes of a lifetime of wounds, stitched together by years of pressure and pain. To understand why he would consider leaving the very thing that defined him, one would have to rewind decades, back to the beginning. For as long as Michael could remember, the stage had been both his home and his prison. At 6 years old, his father Joseph thrust him into rehearsals, demanding perfection with a belt always within reach. A missed note or a wrong step meant punishment. Applause wasn't optional. It was survival. By the time most children were learning to ride bicycles, Michael was already carrying the weight of an entire family's livelihood on his tiny shoulders. "Smile, Michael. Always smile." That's what everyone told him. Audiences adored the little boy with the angelic voice and dazzling spins. But when the curtains fell, and the cheers dissolved into silence, he was left with bruises, some on his skin, others deeper, carved into his heart. By the time he was a teenager, Motown executives had molded him into a product. Every note rehearsed, every appearance scripted. He was no longer just Michael. He was a commodity. Fans screamed for him, managers demanded more, and Joseph reminded him, "Don't you ever forget, You're nothing without that stage. So Michael learned early to bury his pain beneath sequins and smiles. But the years piled on. The higher he soared, the heavier the crown became. The King of Pop, a title he never asked for, was both a blessing and a curse. With it came unimaginable adoration, but also relentless scrutiny. By the 1990s, the tabloids had become his shadow, following him everywhere. His face on every magazine cover, not as an artist but as a target. They mocked his changing appearance, ridiculed his voice, fabricated grotesque stories. He could feel the world dissecting him like a specimen under glass. He gave them music that healed hearts, but in return they gave him lies that tore his apart. Alone in his Neverland estate, Michael would wander through empty hallways filled with laughter machines, carnival rides, and animals, an amusement park built to fill the void of a childhood stolen from him. But the silence between the rides was deafening. The boy who once begged for freedom from his father's strict hand now longed for an ordinary life, one where he could buy groceries without cameras flashing, one where he could walk through a park without bodyguards shielding him. It was in those moments of solitude that he often thought of walking away. He would imagine himself as simply Mike, an anonymous man with no stage to perform on, no headlines to dodge, no mask to wear. But every time he came close, he thought of the fans. They weren't just an audience, they were his lifeline. Letters poured in from children battling cancer, from soldiers listening to his music on distant battlefields, from mothers who said his songs had saved their lives. They saw him not as the caricature the media painted, but as a healer, a brother, a friend. And so he stayed. For them. Yet the weight never lifted. By the night of that European concert, the fractures in his spirit had widened into cracks. Each cheer from the crowd outside felt less like love and more like a demand. A demand to give more, to bleed more, to sacrifice what little remained of himself. In the dressing room, Karen's voice echoed faintly. "Michael, maybe we should call it off tonight. Just rest." But Michael shook his head. "They won't let me rest. No one ever lets me rest." He closed his eyes, and the flood of memories consumed him. Joseph's stern face barking orders, the suffocating grip of Motown executives, the flashbulbs blinding him at every corner, the cold loneliness of Neverland. It all swirled together, pressing down on his chest until he could barely breathe. And then, almost like a cruel trick of fate, a knock at the door. One of his aides entered, holding a letter. "This just came in. It's urgent." Michael unfolded the paper with shaky hands. The words burned into his mind. A death threat. Another one. They had become common, but tonight, in his fragile state, it felt like a final straw. "Why?" he whispered, voice breaking. "Why do they hate me so much?" No one had an answer. At that moment, he wasn't Michael Jackson, the King of Pop. He was just a man, broken and tired, standing on the edge of walking away forever. The walls of the backstage corridor seemed to close in on Michael as he held the letter in his trembling hands. He could hear the roar of the audience outside, tens of thousands chanting his name in unison, their voices colliding like waves in a storm. But inside, it was suffocatingly silent. Every second felt like a hammer striking his heart. Karen hovered by the door, her hands wringing nervously. "Michael, listen to me. You don't have to do this tonight. Not with this hanging over your head. One word from you, and we'll shut it down." He shook his head slowly, his eyes still locked on the paper. "They came for me. They didn't come for a cancellation notice. They came to believe in something." His voice cracked. "But how can I give them belief when I don't even believe in myself right now?" Bill Bray, his longtime bodyguard, stepped forward, his face stern. "Mike, this isn't just some prank. The people who wrote this, they meant it. I've been in this game long enough to know when a threat is real. If you walk out there tonight, you're walking straight into the fire." Michael's chest tightened. For years, he had been chased by shadows, stalkers lurking at the gates of Neverland, fans breaking into hotels, photographers hurling insults to capture a reaction. But this felt different. It wasn't just about humiliation. It was about survival. And yet, beyond the curtain, thousands of fans were stomping their feet, chanting his name like a heartbeat. Michael! 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 He turned to Karen. Do you hear that? She nodded hesitantly. That's love, he whispered. And love is the only thing that keeps me alive. But inside, he was torn. The memories of his childhood flashed in fragments. Joseph's cold eyes, the harsh rehearsals, the relentless push toward perfection. The world had never let him be simply Michael. They wanted the king of pop, the moonwalker, the legend. And now, they wanted him even if it cost his life. He slumped into a chair, burying his face in his hands. I'm tired of being a soldier, he murmured. Always marching, always fighting. I just want peace. Silence fell over the room. Karen reached out, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. Then take it, Michael. Take peace. Walk away. No one will hate you for choosing life over the stage. But deep down, Michael knew that wasn't true. He had seen how the world turned on those who faltered. If he didn't perform tonight, headlines would scream, Michael Jackson cancels again. The tabloids would invent cruel stories, fans would feel betrayed, promoters would lose millions, and he would once again be painted as unreliable, fragile, a fallen star. The pressure was unbearable. Suddenly, the door creaked open, and Frank Dillio, his former manager who had come to visit, peeked in. Mike, you got 5 minutes. The band's ready. The crowd's getting restless. Michael's eyes darted to Frank, then back to the letter. His mind screamed two conflicting truths. If you go out there, you may die. If you don't, a part of you already has. He stood slowly, the sequined jacket catching the dim backstage lights. The costume felt heavier than ever, as if it were made of chains instead of fabric. Each rhinestone was a reminder of who he was supposed to be, not who he really was. Do you know what scares me the most? He whispered to Karen. What? She asked softly. That maybe I've given so much of myself to the world, there's nothing left for me. His voice trailed off, but Karen could see tears glistening in his eyes. Outside, the crowd grew louder, chanting his name with desperate intensity. It was no longer a request, it was a demand. Bill crossed his arms. So what's it gonna be, Mike? Michael stared at the letter one last time before folding it carefully and slipping it into his pocket. He inhaled deeply, his chest rising like a man preparing to dive into deep waters. If this is the end, he whispered to himself, then let it be on my terms, not theirs. The stage manager's voice boomed through the headset. 1 minute to showtime. Michael closed his eyes. In that darkness, he saw flashes of everything. His mother's smile, the laughter of his fans, the pain of the tabloids, the joy of creating music, the loneliness of being misunderstood. And then, as if summoned by some higher force, he saw a vision of himself on stage, not as a victim, but as a warrior, transforming fear into art. He opened his eyes and whispered, "Let's go." The team scrambled, adjusting his microphone, fixing his gloves, straightening his jacket. Karen's eyes filled with worry as she handed him his fedora. "Promise me one thing," she said. "What?" "Come back alive." Michael managed a faint smile. "I'll try." The corridor leading to the stage was dim, but at the end, the blinding white light of the arena spilled through like the mouth of destiny. Each step echoed in his ears, louder than the crowd. The tension in his chest grew heavier with every stride. And then, as he reached the curtain, he paused. For a moment, he considered turning back, disappearing into the shadows, vanishing into anonymity. But the chants were deafening now, shaking the walls. "Michael! Michael! Michael!" He whispered to himself, "This is it. Either I walk out as Michael the man, or as Michael the myth. But either way, I walk out." The curtain rose. The crowd erupted like thunder. Michael stepped into the light. The lights hit him like an explosion. For a split second, Michael Jackson stood frozen at the center of the stage, his silhouette sharp against the blinding white beams. The crowd erupted into a roar so massive that the ground itself seemed to vibrate beneath his feet. Tens of thousands of people rose as one, screaming, crying, chanting his name with the force of a storm. But inside, Michael felt only the crushing weight of the letter in his pocket. The threat pulsed against his chest with every heartbeat, reminding him that this could be the last time he stood before an audience. The sound of the fans was deafening, but beneath it, he could almost hear the phantom scratching of the words that had shaken him. "This is your last show." He adjusted his fedora with a slow, deliberate motion. The crowd screamed even louder. Every tiny gesture was magnified into legend. Yet Michael's mind was not with the crowd. It was with the faceless figure who might be lurking among them, someone who had come not to celebrate, but to destroy. The opening beats of Jam thundered through the speakers, shaking the arena walls. His dancers leapt into motion, a whirlwind of sharp movements and flawless precision. Michael stood still, letting the anticipation build. His body was a coiled spring, waiting for the exact second to strike. When the moment came, he exploded into movement, a blur of energy, his body slicing through the air with impossible grace. The audience lost its collective mind. They weren't watching a man, they were watching a force of nature. And yet, behind every move, Michael felt the tension in his veins. Every leap could be his last. Every spotlight could reveal not just a performer, but a target. He scanned the first few rows quickly as he spun, faces blurred by tears, arms reaching out desperately, but somewhere in the mass of adoration, could danger be waiting? The irony hit him like a knife. The very people who gave him life were also the ones who might take it away. As Jam reached its peak, Michael dropped to his knees, head bowed. The crowd screamed so loudly it shook the rafters. But for Michael, kneeling on that stage, it wasn't just a dance move. It was a silent prayer. If this is my end, let it be here, with them, doing what I was born to do. The band transitioned seamlessly into Billie Jean. The first snap of the drum beat sent a ripple through the audience. Michael stood perfectly still, his head low, one hand at his side. The entire arena froze in anticipation, thousands holding their breath as if time itself had stopped. Then, with the flick of his wrist, he tipped his hat, and the place detonated. It was more than a performance. It was defiance. Every step, every spin, every signature move was a direct challenge to the faceless threat. "You want to silence me? Watch me dance." As he glided backward into the moonwalk, the crowd erupted into hysteria. People fainted, security guards scrambled to pull unconscious fans over the barriers, medics rushed in and out. It was chaos, but it was also magic. Michael's presence had the power to overwhelm the human body itself. And in that chaos, Michael felt something shift inside him. Fear began to dissolve, replaced by something stronger: rage, defiance, and above all, love. The audience wasn't just watching him, they were with him, an army of souls lifting him higher with every scream. But the letter still burned in his pocket. And as the spotlight dimmed for the interlude, his chest tightened again. He whispered into his headset MIC, audible only to his crew, "Keep your eyes open. Something feels wrong." Backstage, Bill Bray barked orders to security, scanning the crowd with hawk-like intensity. Karen clasped her hands tightly, her knuckles white, whispering prayers. The atmosphere wasn't just electric, it was combustible. The show pressed on. Smooth Criminal began, and Michael donned the iconic white fedora. The stage transformed into a cityscape, dancers moving like gangsters around him. He slid across the stage, gravity defying, untouchable. But as he leaned forward into the impossible anti-gravity tilt, a sudden movement in the crowd caught his eye. For a fraction of a second, Michael's heart stopped. Someone in the second tier had stood abruptly, their arm jerking upward. Security lunged, fans screamed, the music thundered on. Michael's instincts screamed danger, but the show demanded precision. He held the pose, his body trembling not from effort, but from fear. The figure was tackled within seconds, dragged out by guards. The audience barely registered it in their frenzy, but Michael saw everything. He exhaled sharply as the dancers pulled him back into formation. That could have been it, he thought. That could have been the end. But he kept going. He had to. The final act approached, Man in the Mirror. The song began softly, with Michael's voice raw, vulnerable, almost trembling. The words carried more weight than ever. If you want to make the world a better place, take a look at yourself and make that change. Fans wept openly. Thousands held lighters and glowing wristbands, the arena shimmering like a galaxy. Michael closed his eyes, pouring every ounce of his fear, love, and exhaustion into the performance. By the final chorus, he wasn't just singing, he was pleading. His voice cracked, his knees buckled, but he pushed on. And in that moment, something extraordinary happened. The crowd began to sing with him. Not just a few, but the entire arena. Tens of thousands of voices rose together, drowning out the music, lifting him higher than any stage ever could. Michael opened his eyes, tears streaming down his face. For the first time that night, the fear was gone. The threat, the danger, the shadows, they melted away beneath the tidal wave of love flooding the arena. He dropped to his knees, overcome. "Thank you," he whispered, though his mic barely picked it up. When the final note faded, there was silence. A silence so profound it felt holy. And then, like a lightning strike, the crowd exploded. Michael remained kneeling, the letter still pressed against his chest in his pocket, but its power had vanished. It no longer defined him. Tonight, he had faced death, and instead of running, he had danced. As he rose slowly to his feet, he whispered words only he could hear. "They tried to break me. But love will always win." The lights dimmed, the curtain fell, and Michael walked off stage into the arms of his crew. Karen was sobbing, Bill was pale, but Michael only smiled faintly. He was exhausted, trembling, but alive. And though no one else knew it, this night would forever remain one of the most dangerous, most transformative, and most legendary performances of his life.